taking a reading lesson this morning out of Revelation chapter 20. We're reading verses 4 through 6. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of our Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. All right. There's a lot of directions what to go in reading those verses in Circle Revelation. Very symbolic chapter in the Bible. But what I want to focus on today is the 1,000-year reign that's spoken of there. In the world today, I watch TV ministries and I see things that are broadcast and things that are in books and movies, and pretty much I'll say almost entirely the inevitable world considers going to be a 1,000-year reign on this earth by Jesus. And that's a foreign doctrine, as far as I'm concerned, to the Missionary Baptist beliefs. The first time that I came in, or exposed to, actually, grew up here at Rocky Mountain and taught sound doctrine. And my college roommate, he was the First Baptist. And so we, of course, we talked about church and things. And by the way, I didn't say the way first. He said, "Well, you sound like the church where my mother grew up over around Clinch River." And so we're passing on. So he was sort of familiar with the way we practice, but he was not familiar with it directly. So the First Baptist Church, and so we somehow got off on the end times. He started talking about the 1,000-year reign and Christ will come back. I've never heard of that. Never heard of it. It's the strangest thing. To start explaining all those points that they had taught, in that church. And so as time has gone on, that's been since the 1980s, but as time has gone on, it's more prevalent. And so it's everywhere, I think, now today. There's been movies, books left behind. So I guess it's a doctrine that it's not been supported in our way for years. I did a little bit of history looking, and this is Confessions of Faith that goes back to, it's gotten back to 1500s. I'm not saying it's every Confession of Faith, but it's got a lot. And they're going up to 1962, I think, is the newest one that's in it. But for instance, the New Hampshire, 1833 New Hampshire Confession of Faith, which I believe is sound, and the last article in it, the heading of it, it's the article 18, it says, "Of the world come." It says, "We believe that the end of this world is approaching, that at the last day, Christ will descend from heaven and raise the dead from the grave to final retribution, that a solemn separation will then take place, that the wicked will be judged to endless punishment, and the righteous to endless joy, and that this judgment will fix forever the final state of men in heaven or hell on principles of righteousness." It doesn't say anything about 7 years of tribulation. It doesn't say anything about a 1,000-year reign on this earth. It doesn't say anything about a temple had to be rebuilt and sacrifices restarted over there in Israel. But that's what they teach, and that's what you see on it's everywhere. So I'm not saying it's the most terrible thing it could be, but I think there are some fundamental problems that come out of it, and I'll try to bring some of those points out as we go further. By the way, and actually I have to give Elder Danny Chapman credit for his research on it. The oldest confession or article of faith we found that referred to pre-millennial business was 1933. So that's less than 9 years ago that this actually made it into a confession of faith as far as his efforts on that. Also, if you go back and you start looking at the origin of this belief, surprisingly enough, you can trace it back to 1830. It was Margaret MacDonald in Port of Glasgow, Scotland, that she proclaimed herself to be a prophetess, by the way, and she came up with this doctrine. And then the Plymouth Brethren in England, they adopted it in Darby, J. and Darby, and then Schofield. They were members of that Plymouth Brethren group, and so they brought it over here. And it's in Bibles. You can find reference Bibles. You can find it in books. It's all Bible. So that's kind of the introduction to the background. I'm going to go today, hopefully. Some of the key points that they hold to, I've already named some of them. They pretty much believe that Antichrist is going to get into a world leadership role, and this is going to be prior to the first bodily resurrection. They believe in multiple resurrections, by the way, 3. So they believe Christ is going to come, take the saved with him, leave the unsaved behind, go through a tribulation period, which will be the 7 years. And then he's going to come back and set up his earthly kingdom for 1,000 years. But including all this, there's a secret rapture. As I said, there's 3 bodily resurrections. They believe that the temple's got to be rebuilt, and we're going to restore animal sacrifices. There's actually the move of the Holy Spirit, and then there's abomination of desolation. They consider that to be a person. So with that, I'll go forward here. One of the key points that I'll bring out is the Matthew, where I think they kind of tie this 1,000-year reign back into chapter 24 and verses 1 through 3. I'll read it in Matthew. It says, "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" All right, so Jesus is there. He's bragging on the temple, and he says this all will be torn down, every stone. And of course, we know that happened. In fact, it happened in 70 AD. Titus did that. So they're there, and they ask them these questions. And I want to point out in verse 3 there, it says, "Tell us which of these things be." So they'll talk about the temple being torn down. But then, and they say, "And what shall be the sign of thy coming?" That's actually a different question. "And of the end of the world." So they kind of assumed that the temple was going to stand, it appears, until the end of time. And so they assumed it was all together. Well, he answers their questions, but it's kind of, I think it's mixed. Honestly, some say it was all about the temple, but particularly, I'm not going to read all of it. I mean, you can read that easily enough, but I want to focus on the point where he owes it. He's referring to Jerusalem being destroyed, and that's in verse 15. And so he refers back to Daniel. I'll read this. "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." So then it goes on, and I can read it, which is, "Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray you that your flock be not in the winter, even on the Sabbath day. For them shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time. No, that there shall be." So, if you go on then in verse 23, he kind of goes into another, it's kind of almost repetition. I think that's where he might be changing one of the answers, but we're not going to worry about that answer today. We're talking about 1,000-year reign, the temple, and Daniel's prophecy. So he's referring to Daniel there in verse 15. Particularly says the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So in Daniel, this is chapter 9, and I'll begin reading verse 24 to 27. It says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. By the way, this is an angel speaking. He prayed, and he wanted to know what's going to happen to Jerusalem, because I don't want to get too complicated with my sermon here today, but they were in exile or captivity with Babylon because they had not been observing the seventh year Sabbath for 490 years, 70 years, and so they were, Ezra had prophecy that it was going to be 70 years, and so that time was about up, and he knew that, and so he was praying what's going to happen to Jerusalem, and so that was the basis of his prayer, and the angel gave him, actually, and it spoke to him. So it says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up division and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore to understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The streets shall be built again, and the wall be for perilous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolation.